Hi, I'm Nick, an MCAT teacher and content creator here at Kaplan. In this video, Greg, one of our expert instructors, will walk you through what we've identified as one of the toughest passages in the CARS section of Kaplan's free MCAT practice test. This test was created by Kaplan's question writers and validated by our psychometrics team to be as representative as possible to the types of passages and questions you'll see on test day. Specifically, this passage is a humanities passage focused on logic and philosophy. Oh boy. So if you want to know how to work through it, follow along with Greg as he walks you through Kaplan's passage and question strategy.
The Kaplan method for CARS involves choosing the best approach for a particular passage, so I'll start reading with the goal of deciding on that approach. This passage begins with a very forceful statement. The word never is strong language, and it's coming directly from the author, which makes it even more important. It's written in a complex way, but the takeaway is advice to be certain about the information you accept. As with a lot of complex language, the author repeats themselves here, so I can scan through the rest of the sentence quickly if I already understood their point. The author's fancy phrasing means that outlining would be a good approach for this passage. This strategy focuses on paraphrasing the author's claims in simpler language, which makes it easier to understand and prioritize the most important information. Then, by writing short notes that capture these paraphrased ideas, I'll have an easier time accessing the info when I need it to answer the questions. The author continues by describing more rules for thinking. Divide problems into pieces, work from the simplest ideas to the most complex, and check everything thoroughly. I usually wouldn't worry about listing these 4 rules and would instead create a short outline note for this paragraph, something like Paragraph 1, Author's 4 Rules for Critical Thinking. Here, though, I'm going to include each rule in my outline note because they're easy to summarize in a few words each, and because they seem like they'll be important to the passage as a whole. The second paragraph is extremely short, but the authors of CARS passages typically divide the text into pieces for good reasons, so there's probably still a worthwhile point in here. The author mentions various subjects that they studied, as well as their hope that this would contribute to their methodological approach, a phrase that seems like it refers to the rules in the previous paragraph. It's not clear to me whether the phrase seemed as though implies that the author's hope is mistaken, or simply an expression of how they felt when they were young. If this distinction is important, I imagine I'll get more info on it later in the passage, so I won't worry about it for now. I summarize the author's comments quickly and move on. Paragraph 3 turns to the first subject that the author studied, logic. The language here is complicated, but I know that understanding fancy words like syllogisms isn't the point of the CARS section. Since the goal of outlining is to paraphrase the text and get a sense of the author's main ideas, I focus on the tone of their comments, which start off seeming critical of the study of logic. The word although in the next sentence implies that the author will continue to criticize logic, so I can be sure of the tone even if I don't know what a precept is, or what these other terms mean. The beginning of the next sentence implies a change of direction, and the author has a much more positive view of philosophy than they do of logic. I capture these contrasting opinions in my outline note. Paragraph 4 addresses the last subject that the author studied, mathematics. They immediately show a negative attitude towards it, and also make critical comments about geometry and algebra specifically. Just like the last paragraph, I don't try to summarize the specifics of these negative comments. They're complicated, and the details may not be essential for answering questions. Instead, I write an outline note that shows the author's general attitude, and I'll refer back to the text if I need to know anything more specific than that. Paragraph 5 begins with the author feeling the need to seek out a different approach, then launches into the next sentence, which is long and complicated but has clues to let me know what's actually important. The first phrase suggests that the author is making a metaphor, but that their main point will come after this statement, so I read quickly to get to the next part. Instead of tells me again that the author is focusing on what they think you shouldn't do, so I keep reading quickly. Finally, I get to the author's actual advice. Just stick to the 4 principles, which must refer to the rules mentioned in the first paragraph. As long as you absolutely stick to them, the author thinks that you're in good shape. This is a strange paragraph for a couple of reasons. The initial hint about some other approach only led back to the rules we talked about at the beginning of the passage, not anywhere new. I didn't expect this, but the clues in the text are clear, and so I can summarize the takeaway in my outline. Looking over my notes, the passage's ideas are actually pretty simple. The author just expressed them in a very wordy way. Now that I've cut through this complicated language, I'm well prepared to answer the questions. Question 8 asks why the author included a specific piece of information in the passage. This puts it in the AAMC category of reasoning within the text questions, and Kaplan classifies it as a function question, since that type involves asking for the purpose of part of the text. Specifically, this question is asking why the author discussed philosophy and math. The advantage to using the outlining approach, as I did for this passage, is that my outline will sometimes provide quick answers to questions. So I'll investigate it first, and only return to the passage itself if I need to. The author mentions philosophy in paragraph 3 as a useful topic, and then discusses math as something that isn't useful. So the 2 topics mentioned in the question are contrasting good and bad results of the author's studies. Based on my last outline note, all of this study ultimately led the author to the 4 rules of thinking that they described earlier in the passage. I make this my prediction, and then glance over the answer choices. I don't find a clear match, but this doesn't bother me. Predictions don't have a 100% success rate, they just make the process of finding the correct answer easier. So I'll review each answer choice and see if I can confidently eliminate any of them. Choice A is wrong because the passage doesn't focus on any connections between logic, algebra, and geometry. They're separate topics that the author considers individually. Choice B doesn't have anything obviously wrong with it, so I move on to C. This choice must be incorrect since the author disliked the subject of logic and wouldn't have suggested that other people study it more closely. And choice D does accurately reflect the author's negative attitude towards logic, but this opinion about logic isn't connected to what the question was asking about, which is the purpose of the author's study of philosophy and mathematics. These topics weren't how the author reached their conclusion about logic, so choice D is also wrong. This only leaves choice B, which must be correct. And glancing back at my outline, the last paragraph note reminds me that the ultimate point of the passage was justifying the author's 4 rules, so it's reasonable to describe almost any element of the passage as contributing to this. I can select B confidently. Question 9 asks for the author's primary concern in the passage, and this puts it in the AAMC category of Foundations of Comprehension. Kaplan categorizes it as a main idea question, since it's asking for the author's overall intent. I need to identify the main goal behind developing the method that the author wrote about. I'll refer to my outline first, since it'll often provide an answer directly, and when it doesn't, it'll usually point to where the answer is located in the passage. The method that the question is referring to has to be the 4 rules the author listed in paragraph 1. Based on my outline note, they appear to be rules for thinking and problem solving. I put this into words as my prediction, and it's a great match for answer choice C. So the method has given me the correct answer without spending a lot of time eliminating the other choices. Kaplan's method for cars questions starts with identifying the question type, since this information will let me take the most efficient path to answering it. Question 10 asks about what a discussion in the passage is supporting, so the AAMC categorizes it as a reasoning within the text question. More specifically, since it's asking how one part of the passage supports another part, Kaplan types it as a strengthen, weaken within the text question. The next step is to express the question in simple language. This question is asking for the conclusion that's supported by the author's critical discussion of geometry. At this point, the Kaplan method suggests investigating the question. Since I outlined the passage, I'll use my outline to find where geometry was discussed. Geometry was addressed in paragraph 4, and the author concludes that it's not very useful for their goals. So the specific discussion referenced in the question was probably intended to justify this negative evaluation of geometry. The Kaplan method's next step is to take the information that I found and make it into a prediction, where I put into words the correct answer choice that I expect to see when I look at the choices. I phrase my prediction according to what we already found, and I notice that 2 of the answer choices show a positive attitude, so they have to be wrong. My prediction has instantly eliminated half of the choices, saving a lot of time. Choice A shows the negative attitude towards geometry that I predicted, but it has a positive view of algebra, which doesn't match the author's views, so it's also wrong. This means that choice D must be correct, and its idea of mathematics being incomplete does match the limited scope of geometry that the author discussed in paragraph 4. Question 11 asks what the author would probably think about a situation that isn't mentioned in the passage, so the AAMC classifies it as reasoning beyond the text. Kaplan additionally categorizes it as an apply question, since it asks for the author's judgment about this new situation. Specifically, I need to determine which college courses the author would recommend taking. I'll check my outline notes for clues. It's very likely that they'll provide a direct answer to the question, since academic subjects were a big topic in this passage. As I recalled, the author addresses several subjects in paragraphs 3 and 4. Philosophy is the only one that they approve of. I make this my prediction, and it's a great match for choice B. Question 12 presents new information and then asks how it would affect the author's claims, which puts it into the AAMC category of reasoning beyond the text, and the Kaplan category of a strengthen, weaken beyond the text question. It asks how the critic's comments about group decision-making in chemistry would affect the author's argument. Since I outlined this passage, I'll consult those notes first. My outline doesn't mention anything about chemistry or group decision-making, and I'm pretty sure that these details weren't discussed in the passage at all. So there doesn't seem to be any direct connection between the new info and the author's argument. But the 4 rules that the author suggests following could be used by a group as well. Now that I've essentially answered the question, I make it my prediction. Choice A is an excellent match for my prediction, so the method helped me to answer the question quickly without spending too much time analyzing the wrong answer choices. I'll start with the first step of Kaplan's method for cars questions, which is to identify the question type. This will help me to find the most effective approach. Question 13 asks about how the examples presented in the answer choices relate to the passage, so the AAMC categorizes it as a reasoning beyond the text question. And since it asks how an example is connected to the passage, Kaplan further classifies it as an apply question. The next step of the method involves rephrasing the question in simpler language so that I can stay focused on it while looking for an answer. In this case, I'll be looking for the answer choice that contradicts the 4 principles in the passage. Next, the method suggests that I investigate the answer to this question. I chose outlining as my approach to the passage, so I'll usually check my outline first for clues in answering any question. This is especially likely to be helpful when the question is asking about a major theme of the passage, like this one is. The author's 4 rules are the main focus of the text. I listed the rules in my outline notes for paragraph 1, which ends up saving a lot of time since I won't need to go back to the passage itself to summarize them. Since the question asks for what's inconsistent with the rules, the correct answer will match the opposite of one of these points. The next step of the method involves putting the correct answer into words, which we call a prediction. This will make it much easier to recognize the correct answer when I see it. I phrase my prediction by reversing each of the 4 rules mentioned in paragraph 1. I'd be making this prediction in my head, not writing all of this down on my noteboard. Now, rather than trying to determine whether each answer choice is right or wrong, I just look for one that matches these ideas. Choice D matches 2 of them. The psychiatrist didn't check the accuracy of the medical reports, and so they used information that may not necessarily be true. This means it's correct, and by avoiding the need to analyze each of the other choices, I saved a lot of time.